This is a fictional alternate timeline story for entertainment, not real events. It starts with a phone vibration that feels like a punch. Stay indoors. Avoid windows. Limit travel. A resident stares at the screen, waiting for the moment it feels unreal. But it does not. Because the horizon flashes. Not fireworks, not lightning. A distant pulse of light that makes the sky look wrong. And when the sound arrives, it arrives late, heavy, and deep. Not a bang, a wait. The resident backs away from the window and hears their own breathing for the first time all day. Fast, shallow, uncontrolled. And across thousands of bedrooms, the same thought appears at the same time. This is real. Minutes later, the second vibration hits, then the third, then the fourth. People do not even read the words anymore. They read the tone. The tone says, something has already started. The war does not begin like a movie. It begins like a system failure with fear inside it. Airspace restrictions expand. Flights disappear from screens. Some routes close overnight. Trains slow into checkpoints and detours. Highways jam with people trying to leave and people trying to return. Nobody knows which direction is safer. And then the first casualty numbers appear, not faces, numbers. Numbers scrolling under breaking banners. Numbers that climb in a way that makes the stomach turn. Numbers that don't explain the real damage, because in total war, the loud hits are not the only killers. The invisible hits start stacking immediately. A hospital worker checks supplies like someone counting breaths. Power, oxygen, fuel, staff. The building is still standing, but the world outside is moving differently. The network lags, not down. Lagging. And lag is terrifying because it feels like the world is still alive, but struggling to stay alive. Ambulance arrive, not endless, enough to change the air, enough to make hallways feel narrower, enough to make time feel expensive. A nurse hears a sentence repeated so often it becomes a curse. We're at capacity. Outside, the city sounds different. More sirens, more helicopters, more distant booms that people try to call thunder just to stay sane. Then the power begins to wobble, not one dramatic blackout. Pockets, dimming, sudden drops. A power grid engineer watches the frequency behave like a stressed heartbeat. Protective systems trigger to prevent a bigger collapse. A district dims, then another, then another. Traffic lights fail. Elevators stop. Mobile signal drops in patches. A city becomes quieter in the most frightening way. And in the dark, fear grows teeth. A resident walks down a stairwell with a phone flashlight. Neighbors don't talk. They nod like strangers. People aren't rude. They're conserving energy for panic. Then the ports tighten. Inspections multiply. Access zones shrink. Schedules break. Ships wait offshore like ghosts, and the global economy does something worse than crashing. It freezes. Freezing is what happens when nobody trusts tomorrow. Insurance spikes. Certain routes become too risky overnight. Warehouses fill. Deliveries slide from late to unknown. Unknown becomes the new global alarm, because unknown is a future you cannot plan around. You can only prepare for it. Preparation is what turns fear into scarcity. Now scarcity arrives. Not evenly, not fairly. Fuel becomes unpredictable. Medicine becomes precious. Food becomes a schedule instead of a choice. Stores aren't empty at first. They're unstable. A resident enters a supermarket and sees purchase limits. Not because everything is gone, because everyone is preparing at the same time. Preparing is what turns fear into shortage. A line forms outside a pharmacy. A line forms at an ATM. A line forms at a gas station. And lines are where society changes. Because lines are humiliating. Lines make people feel powerless. And powerless people don't stay polite forever. A rumor spreads that the shortages aren't accidental, that someone wants fewer choices and more control. Nobody can prove it, but fear doesn't need proof to become real. Across cities and countries, the same scene repeats. First it's protests, then it's strikes, then it's shutdowns. Truckers stop driving certain routes. Dock crews slow operations for safety. Factory shifts pause. Not because people are lazy, because people are scared, and fear makes the world smaller. The second night is worse than the first, not because more people understand, because more people have adapted. The first night is shock. The second night is acceptance. And acceptance is terrifying because it is when societies harden. Curfews expand, checkpoints multiply, restricted zones grow, rationing begins to appear in quiet ways. Priority lists show up behind counters and in apps. People start talking in code. When are you going? How much do you have? Do you know someone who can get it? And in the background, the war keeps moving. Not one clean front line, a shifting pressure across many places. The cyber pressure keeps squeezing too. Payments get delayed, verification layers stack, transfers show pending, businesses can't settle invoices, workers wait for wages. A small business owner stares at a payroll screen and feels their throat tighten, not because the money is gone, because timing is gone. Timing is life support, and timing is what the war steals first. Casualty numbers rise again, not only from direct hits, from cascades, accidents during blackouts, delayed ambulances in jams, medication arriving too late, cold nights without heat in some neighborhoods, stress that turns bodies into emergencies. A hospital worker finishes a shift that felt like 3 days. They walk outside and realize the air feels different, not physically, socially, like the future got heavier. Now both systems respond with full coordination. In this fictional timeline, a European-led system aligned with an expanded BRICS bloc tightens internal control. Priority corridors for critical goods, priority payments for strategic categories, infrastructure protection at maximum level, industrial output redirected toward continuity, and information management to reduce public panic. At the same time, the US-led alliance tightens coordination with partners. Emergency logistics lanes, infrastructure defense, a rapid manufacturing surge, constant communication, and higher readiness across multiple domains. Both sides believe they are preventing collapse. But both sides are doing it at the same time, so the planet enters a loop where everything becomes critical. And when everything is critical, mistakes become catastrophic. A delayed message becomes a misread intent. A false alarm triggers real retaliation. A system glitch looks like sabotage. A rumor becomes policy. In total war, interpretation becomes reality. And for citizens, reality becomes smaller every day. Fewer choices, fewer freedoms, fewer guarantees. People stop asking why. They start asking how long. How long until the lights stabilize? How long until payments clear? How long until supplies normalize? How long until normal comes back? And then the most terrifying realization lands. Normal isn't coming back. Not the old normal. Because total war doesn't only destroy, it rewrites. Then the chaos hits its peak. A major port locks down. A large region runs on reduced power. Air routes tighten again. Payment rails prioritize only certain categories. Networks isolate harder, everything is still functioning. But it's functioning like a body running on adrenaline. Fast decisions, hard rules, no patience. And that's when citizens truly revolt. Not because they woke up evil, because their lives stopped working. A crowd gathers outside a distribution point. Someone shouts. Someone pushes. A rumor moves through the crowd like electricity. People don't march for ideology. They march for basics: food, heat, medicine, safety. A future that still feels real. Security shows up, not to be villains, to restore control. But control doesn't feel like safety to a hungry crowd. It feels like punishment. And that is how the streets become another front. Not a glorious front, a desperate one. Now the world reaches the moment every thriller needs. The moment when the machine can't keep sprinting. Because emergency mode has one fatal flaw. It can't last. Something has to give. And here comes the final twist. A back channel opens. Not peace, not friendship. A cold emergency line. Engineers coordinate stability windows. Grid operators synchronize protection periods. Ports establish protected corridors. Emergency communications stay open. It isn't trust, it's survival math. Because both sides finally see the same truth. If the arteries collapse, nobody wins. A limited stop line forms. Not everywhere, not permanent, but enough. Enough to stabilize power. Enough to reopen ports in controlled windows. Enough to let hospitals breathe. Enough to let priority payments clear. Enough to let the sky be dark again. And when the sky goes dark, the world doesn't feel safe. It feels fragile. A resident sits on the floor, phone in hand, battery low, hands shaking. Not because the sirens are loud, because the sirens are finally quiet. And quiet now feels like danger. They think about what mattered when everything broke. Water, power, food, medicine, family, truth, trust. And one realization lands hard. Normal life is a miracle built on invisible systems, and those systems can be rewritten overnight. In this fictional timeline, the war did not end the world. It reshaped it. Two systems remain. Two tech worlds. Two money rails. Two security realities. And the price of reliability becomes higher than anyone expected because reliability now demands control. So the final question is not who won. The final question is, what would you trade away to feel safe? And here is the bridge to Season 2. Because the war does not truly end when the sirens stop. It ends when people can live again. And the world cannot live like it used to. So Season 2 begins with a different battlefield. Not the sky, not the sea. The inside. What happens when emergency powers stay in place because the emergency never fully ends? What happens when shortages become normal and temporary rules become permanent? What happens when citizens stop believing the system will ever give control back? If you want Season 2, hit like and subscribe. Comment your theory. What happens next? See you in the next one.